best ways to get engineering involved during the discovery period? Does anyone, either the person that added that up, want to explain more about their thinking in that question, or does anyone have any specific thoughts that they'd like to come in on there?
I'll go. I actually added it. So Barry, to your point, yeah. So in my experience, I think engineering either sort of doesn't want to participate during discovery, or they view discovery as the build phase. So we kind of what I've seen in the past is that sometimes engineers just dive in and immediately go to solutionizing and building. And I think it's what I'm interested in is how do we best find the balance between participating in risk assessment, especially technical risk assessment, and not necessarily going straight to build. So finding that balance, that was really what I was after.
Great, thanks, Grant. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Any comments on that?
I can add a few words. I guess the key is how early in the discovery stage. Every company is different in terms of the types of discovery, and the product team could quite literally being out in the field testing very less digital type solutions to start with. But I think having a dual track approach typically works with having an engineer who's a bit more scrappy or a smaller subset of the team, and being very clear that that is the stage that they're at, and that they shouldn't be writing anything that's going to be sort of foundational if they can help it. So really kind of focusing on sort of throwaway prototypes early on and make that distinction clear. But the best I've seen is where you have, it depends on the nature of the discovery and what the nature is. I've seen whole teams jump in based on more sort of technical challenges. And I've also seen a very lightweight approach that I started with there with just a one or two engineers doing that discovery until it's proven that that's a direction that the product team, the business wants to take. So that's typically worked well. Hopefully that's helpful.
I've seen an approach where we're actively using the engineering team with activity within their sprints around R&D. So they're actually going off and creating up new functionality, new capabilities to showcase and bring back to the product team in the same way that the product team are working with their customers, analysing the market and trends and trying to predict the future, and actually using both as a show and tell in each direction. So no one is barred from being creative and innovative in terms of where they get their time and effort and what comes out of it that could potentially go into the product. However, there does need to be a product selection or prioritization process that's going to feed back into the roadmap. Off the back of that, someone needs to be the tiebreaker, whether that's the chief product officer or technical officer. It depends who reports to whom and what the organization's like.
I think it's about establishing common goals and objectives, being fully aligned, the two functions, and being able to share ownership of the product roadmap. So each department will basically agree on a common way going forward, driven by the business objectives and where the company is heading. It's all about adding value. So it goes down to alignment of the two functions and a clear understanding, be transparent in terms of the communication, breaking things down, and some frameworks there and tool sets about how to manage prioritization and being agile. And so I think it's more about common vision going forward and be fully aligned, share the same objectives, I guess, from my experience.
I have seen as well is there's been a natural delineation, and these stakeholders place themselves within those roles, and maybe the third one placed themselves in that role because the others didn't. And this is an experience I had at CACI when I was running their geospatial analytics development team. And we found that developers themselves are very good at bringing up operational functional capabilities and the art of the possible and these nice new shiny things that they could possibly do. We found product owners were good at bringing in tactical changes that would benefit customers and help them move around for and solve particular problems that customers were experiencing. But I then found that no one was looking at the strategic technical stack that was actually being taken on. And therefore, myself as the CTO and the head of development stepped into that role to make sure that that was being brought in and that all levels of stakeholder within actually had a voice and an involvement to do that. So yeah, it was just a natural delineation. I don't know if anyone else has seen that out there, but it's what I experienced.
Grant, is this answering your question? Are you feeling? Thanks everyone, by the way, for jumping in and sharing the thoughts. But yeah, Grant, where's that left you with your original question?
Yeah, I think I mean, it was really just not a question per se, because I just wanted to sort of start a conversation, I guess, and just get everyone's perspectives. I think as we can see, a number of different perspectives, but it's what's clear and what my hypothesis is that it's entirely situational, dependent on how the teams are structured and how they work together. So it's kind of confirmed what I've long suspected, I guess.
At my last role, I was CTO. And the strapline for being brought in was tell us what we're going to sell for the next 5 years and then help us sell it. So it was establishing an office of the CTO and re-establishing the product process with product owners, but with the broader push up and down in terms of having a whole supply chain and ecosystem to sit behind to the delivery of that. So it was very much, in some instances, building internal capability so that we could deliver, whether that was a professional service or a coded product, or indeed whether we were actually partnering with a third party to provide that, and we would put a managed service wrap around their services and sell it on as our own. That product, bringing in that product capability, it was very much product reported into me, and but I was responsible for owning that relationship up and down. So whether it was go to market or go to delivery for actually being able to execute off the back of that, but I took the lead in the ownership, albeit that elements of that were delegated down so that we could make sure that I wasn't the bottleneck that was going to sit in the way. But it was the expectation on me was to set the higher level strategy and direction, and then make sure that that was agreed and supported what the other key stakeholders wanted to do at the C-level, and then roll that down within the organization so that we could actually execute against it, and with strategic partners as well.
And how did that work, Nick? Looking back, would you say that was a success? Would you do it again that way, or would you?
Yeah, I'd do it again. I'd do it again with the original resource that was promised to support it, so that it could go at the rate that it was supposed to. I think if I'd known that some of the budget that was going to be available for that was going to go away, I would have taken a less aggressive approach in terms of the velocity of what we were going to do. And I would have broken down and pushed back some of the phases in terms of extending out the breadth of the product line. So there were definitely areas that we would have started slower so that we could consolidate and make sure that it was released as a good functioning product before we moved on and ran something else alongside it. But yeah, situational. Depends on cash. Is that you're going to go as fast as the available cash that you have?
Great stuff. Okay, thank you, everyone. So then on the topic then of pushing back, I'm going to switch lanes slightly. One of the other ones that has been voted several times is empowering tech to push back to product. I don't know who put this down. Does anyone want to talk a little bit around that? Again, that subject was empowering tech to push back to product.
I think anyone should be able to push back to product, and most definitely tech. I think products needs to be able to justify their choices, their directions. That hopefully they've got good data. If it's a gut feel and a reach, then they should just be open and clear about that. And actually, that's perfectly fine if it's a known risk that everybody's signing up to. But yeah, anybody should be able to put their hand up. And equally, if you're sat there and you're planning out your roadmap going forward, and there's the tech start coming back and just saying, well, it's great that you've dreamt that the technology does that, but ... it could well be that the aspiration outreaches their grasp at that time. So that could just push back into the roadmap that either it needs to be reprioritized, or there's actually other stuff, either R&D or investigative work that needs to take place before they can step forward. So yeah, I don't know. Does anyone else think that that tech should have a big stick and be able to go and poke product on a regular basis?
I mean, it's having the right kind of discipline, isn't it? I think it works both ways. Even like I've seen tech where it's just like never-ending migrations, or stuff that goes on forever that doesn't have clear metrics. I had one of the topics I had was this. So I think it's having the right sort of discipline about like how you define an initiative, having clear goals, clear scope, and OKRs, and like an objective, and just working together as a team within product and tech, and not just say it's like a product-led initiative or a tech-led. I mean, you just have business initiatives that achieves a business outcome, and having like a standard set of metrics around it. So I think like anyone can push back, like whether it's product or tech, like you just say, ask more questions and clarification, things like that. So having a healthy conversation, those are the things that makes a difference, from what I've seen.
I completely agree. The governance and structure that you have, and equally fostering a culture of inclusion and openness. The one, I suppose, the health warning that I would maybe add into that I've seen is particularly some engineers, highly conscientious, detailed people who want to know the absolute detail of anything to the nth degree before they could possibly make a commitment and a decision forward, and being able to tie break, or at least give them space away from the people that don't need quite as much detail, to let that mature before they step forward. Yeah, sometimes they're not aware of how their communication style impacts others within the organization.
Great, thanks both. Does anyone have any experiences that contrast those opinions, or any particular challenges in maybe a culture that's not quite as open or transparent, where that's not quite as easy to do?
I mean, you can have other developers that are at the other end of the spectrum, that they're so enthusiastic that you're booking it in for the sprint that's going to kick off in a couple of days, and then they come in on Monday and say, "Oh, I did it at the weekend. Here you go." It's completely unqualified and probably not as well formed as it was going to be when it was going to be put into the sprint. But yeah, sometimes they can move faster and maybe move in a slightly different direction from the one that was intended.
And any thoughts then, Nick, on how to just ensure this is done the right way? Like, I know we've got some junior CTOs and possibly even some aspiring CTOs on the call. Any thoughts for people on how to make sure that kind of thing doesn't happen, those mistakes aren't made?
Harness enthusiasm wherever you can. It's most definitely, if you can try and keep it focused, while at least giving them time to be creative at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive, but sometimes they can be perceived that way. I would, for those people that just live and breathe code and will happily sit there until about 2 to 3 in the morning because they're enthusiastic and engaged about what they're writing at the moment, you're not going to be able to stop that. If you can maybe keep them focused on the sprints and the pipeline that you're working through, that would be fantastic. If they're doing that, I mean, it could well be that you can increase your velocity. Equally, sometimes you need to get them to dial back and just step away from the keyboard, because it's great if you've done that overnight. If this is the 8th night that you've done that, and you're just going to burn out. So there has to be a balance in there as well, where some people's balance is a completely different place from others.
Interesting point from Nick. So how do you mitigate velocity with technical depth, and where do you draw the line? I mean, is it about fast delivering, or is it about adding value going forward to the product?
I think ultimately it has to be adding value, and hopefully the backlog and those elements that you're dropping into each of your sprints are going to add value. If it's going to, obviously there's always going to be technical debt. It depends how much luxury you've got and where you're up to. So again, we're back to the context of the organization. If you're driving for an MVP to hit a position so that you can demonstrate a particular capability to a potential investor to get them to sign on the dotted line, it may well do. And velocity is everything. I mean, the whole thing that you create may be something that you'd bin the moment that you get the next round of investment. Equally, if you're in a larger organization, you're not going to have that type of pressure that's going to be on you, and you can balance, but you're probably likely to have a more mature product that's got technical debt in spades. So you always need to be able to balance working out technical debt from how fast you're working it in, and also adding value as you go. I think it very much depends on the context of the organization and scale and what you're trying to do with the product.
I'm very interested in the last 25 years. How do you model that trade-off? From my experience, how do you model that trade-off of technical depth and their value? You know, it's always been very challenging. I'm not talking about POCs or MVPs or anything like that. I'm talking about really fast-pacing, releasing pipelines where you have to release 3 times a week for real production platform software as a service thing. Yeah.
I think it has to be a conscious decision as to what you're going for, and actually, at least in my experience anyway, and happy for anyone else to cut across me, it tends to go in waves depending on what the targets are. Typically, there are wider targets or OKRs that are sitting behind how the business is running, and there will be waterfall targets that have come down from on high. That we're going to hit this particular milestone at this particular point. It's great if you're on a run up to that with weeks and weeks and weeks of work to get to it, but it may well be that you hit problems along the way, and actually you need to build in technical debt so that you can just get the velocity to hit the milestone, knowing full well that actually the week after you're going to have to add those items back into the backlog so that you can just go back and do it properly. Sometimes though, we've used that because we were going through a modernization and transformation process. We were actively creating code and functionality that and infrastructure that we knew that we were going to destroy, but it was really just providing a scaffold to allow us to prove a point as a demonstrator, and to provide the structure for the next stage that we were going to go through. So it was almost that one stage would be the support for the next. You then have to destroy what was behind it so that you could leapfrog ahead. I don't know if that makes any sense. It does when you're there. So there's, again, it's down to context and where you're up to, and the organization. The suite of products I was working with, there were 15 different products that were all overlapping, and we were trying to bring them onto a single common architecture, and one so that we could avoid the technical debt that was going to be there, so that if you fixed it once, you fixed it across all 15 products. And so we found that as we went through that process, even though we were semi-inefficient in the way that we were going forward, it meant that we were increasingly gaining value and benefit from it, because we were reducing the amount of technical debt that we were actually going to be perpetuating going forward. So yeah, it worked in a weird way. Equally, we were adopting different technology, a different architectural stack as we were going. This was very much going from client server to containerized services with some platform services that we were taking on board as well, up in an Azure environment. So there was some learning along the way, and at the time it was Azure Container Services when they didn't even support Windows containers, and a lot of the automation and operations stack that sits around it today wasn't there. So there was a learning curve to build into that process as well, and we didn't always get it right. So yeah, hindsight's a wonderful thing. Instant technical debt.
Every P-Days, does that cover your question, cover your interest there?
Yes, covered. I think I've been there. So some of the things Nick mentioned, it's not always easy. It's very challenging, I have to say. So I want to hear some thoughts from other people as well. Been there 25 years, so it's always a challenge. I always call the technical debt like the loan that you get for your mortgage. So sometimes you have to do that as a trade-off. You have to sacrifice that for the long term going forward, especially when things are moving so fast. But I'm sure people here on this call, they've got their own experiences, and people, sure they will understand what I'm talking about. That's very natural going forward. It's all about trade-off. It's all about being aligned with the product, driven by the business objectives. That's it. Thanks for the input, Nick.
From what you were saying then as well, it reminded me of one thing. We had a lot of discussions about adding value, but who it was adding value to. Was it adding value to the end consumer? Was it adding value to management? Was it adding value to operations or the engineering base?
I think it should start from the end. It should be customer-centric. We should be customer-centric. That's the starting point, and then you go backwards. My point of view, I think it should be customer very close to the consumer, whether it's a company or consumer, B2B or B2C, then it should be, that's the starting point in going backwards. That's how you visualize your strategy and your vision. That's from my own experience, I think.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna just again shift lanes a little bit here, just to a slightly different question here. So again, under the heading of bridging the gap between product and tech here, how do you build trust? And I'm again really interested to hear from anyone that's seen this in practically, that's seen examples of this where trust has been built well between the two areas, and any areas where maybe it's not been built and it's felt on us versus them or anything like that. Any thoughts or experiences? Anyone happy to share?
I'll jump in again. I think I've seen both where product have gone away and created their own vision, a strategy, and then the tech team has to come in and try and implement that versus a sort of a collaborative approach. And not surprisingly, the collaborative one is the one that that is more likely to succeed, or has more likely to succeed in my experience. I think also where there is that really sort of tight feedback loop between all the members of the individual teams, that's worked wonders. So in terms of things like the Google Health team metrics, the actual teams looking at that, and in terms of psychological safety, dependability, being actively aware of how they're kind of feeling within the team, that makes a big difference. So I think that collaborative nature on constructing kind of the vision and the mission and how they're going to work together has definitely served well, and appreciating both each other's strengths and weaknesses on the teams, because I think quite often that's the other thing that can sometimes happen is product might not always have all the technical knowledge, or tech obviously won't always have the product knowledge. So it's coming together to augment each other for sort of the I guess to amplify the team itself, and everybody realizing that. So that's why I've seen it work well, operating as a unit, I guess, rather than a group of individuals just coming together to deliver an output.
And is that often for like a case of kind of speed and going straight into it and just getting things done quickly, and that's where the mistakes made because there wasn't enough time put in for that collaborative approach? Or is it done that way out of a culture, or is there maybe a very difficult person at the top or opinionated person driving it a certain way?
I think it's a cultural, I think you can instill collaboration through, you can go down more the kind of hackathon route and everyone gets together and suddenly magic happens. But I think quite often it's a cultural thing in terms of respecting each other's opinion, being vulnerable, being able to be pioneering in their approach, and everybody respecting that. So it's a lot about setting principles and actually people acting out those principles day to day rather than just actually saying those. So I think you're leading by example in those situations. Your team is leading by example, and that is what the rest of the organization will see, either in meeting or through demos. You'll see that depending on your organization structure. So that I've seen is the sort of you get to see what success looks like. As a leader, people look up to you and say, well, this is what Marty's doing, here's how a leader should perform. You look at other teams and they say, well, what makes that team great? And quite often people follow examples of what they see within the organization, regardless of also what principles or other things are written down in documents or in presentations. It's quite often by examples, because that's often what people are seeing in practice.
Brilliant, thank you.
Can I just add something as well?
Oh, sorry, Kat, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I wanted to add something as well to this. So one thing I think is important as well, to match the strategy to the situation, right? Understanding the context. Where is it a startup environment? Is it a turnaround, accelerated growth, the alignment, sustaining success, depending on the company strategy as well. Like what kind of skills do we need, and how do we create that alignment between product and engineering development when it comes to the trust side. But I think a lot of it is also how do you build trust in general. And something that helped me was when I discovered the trust equation. I'm not sure how many people are aware of that. It's just like it's trying to establish what the trust components are, and the equation per se is trust equals credibility plus reliability plus intimacy, all divided by self-interest. So what does that mean? It breaks down trust into a few elements that sometimes we just mistake trust by having a relationship with someone, but it is a bit more than that. So credibility is about obviously being competent at what you're doing, right? So if, to the previous comment as well, if product sees, for example, an engineering leader who is not able to articulate the business value of engineering, who is not able to help the product roadmap strategy and everything else, that erodes the trust as well. So credibility is about having the intellectual capacity to be competent in what you're doing. Reliability is easy, is doing what you say you're going to do. Intimacy is obviously that relationship element as well. We are humans. We need to collaborate. We need to have some sort of relationship to get along with each other and create successful teams, successful products. And the asset, the division point at the bottom of the equation is self-interest. What do you care more about yourself? Is it a person who cares more about myself? I'm an egoistic person. I care only about my self-interest, or do I care about the success of the team, success of the product, success of the company that we're building as well? So I think it is important when we're talking about how do you build a trust between either different departments, different leadership teams, different individuals as well, is to look like how is a trust equation being split, and what kind of erodes that trust as well, and try to focus on that, try to understand and think more about it as well. That's what I want to add.
Have you seen this in practice, Kat? Have you seen this play out like in your organizations, and seen the change go from a lack of trust to where people are starting to think about this more intentionally?
Yes. So bringing it down to an example as well is the work that I've done a few years ago in at least 2 consecutive jobs, where it was exactly that trust elements that I was talking about, which are missing from a basically a lack of engineering leadership to be there, and then product taking over the space when it comes to running the show, when it comes to creating a product roadmap strategy, creating the speaking on behalf of the engineering team when it comes to technical solution, or influencing how we split the backlog as well. And that only be built, the kind can be built with some of the elements that I mentioned as well. So having someone who is competent at the domain, who is able to understand what engineering capabilities do we need in order to achieve success, whatever the success that may be, having some sort of alignment. I use OKRs quite a lot. I'm a big fan of OKRs, not for the checkbox exercise, but for the communication that brings and the alignment that it creates between different departments, different groups, to try to see, first, let's try to understand what success looks like, and then are we enabled to do that in the next quarter? Is everyone on board with that? And if someone has something to say, hopefully having a safe environment, people can raise their hand and say, hey, I have a problem with that, let's talk about it. So what I've tried to do in the past is actually build that credibility when it comes to I am competent at what I'm doing. I try to fit and make sure that the engineering capabilities is aligned from a skill set perspective, from a maturity perspective, from a team perspective. We understand the product vision, product roadmap strategy, and then we try to our best to map it out, not for the sake of estimations, but for the sake of everyone trying to align and understand what a success looks like, and try to deliver on that with short feedback loops, with iterations, with creating as much as possible demos and putting in front of product and business and the clients in order to get that feedback that we have delivered the stuff that we wanted to deliver in the first place. And yeah, the feedback loops, I think, is a very important part of that exercise as well, is making sure that you're not building a silo, creating something that you think is the right place, is in the right place, but then showing you off later, because you're eroding the trust equation as well. People will not necessarily believe that you have a trust relationship if I can't see anything for the few 2 or 3 months as well. So that's important to factor in as well.
Brilliant, thanks, Kat. Derek, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, actually, just to buttress Kat's and Martin's point, I believe that it's more to the fact that having sort of cross-functional interactions between the product team and the tech team, addressing some of these challenges that arises. I mean, especially that's an experience I've had, helps obviously resolve some of these issues. And I think Martin spoke about the vision, and it's also very important to align. Once the product team and tech can align to the vision and goals of the business, it helps to obviously foster better trust and obviously collaborative decision making when it comes to that. So yes, I just want to add to great points from Martin and Kat there.
Fantastic. Okay, I think we've covered a lot there. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add on the subject of trust at all? Very good. Okay. In which case, I'm going to move on to another one that's had quite a few votes here. Where do you draw the lines between CTO and CPO? And it also leads into, what about the new trend of CPTO? So does anyone want to talk about either side of that? Drawing the lines, are there lines? Are there specific lines? Any thoughts on this at all from anyone?
I think it would, we're down to context as well, size of the organization and maturity as to where product sits within the hierarchy. One, is there even a dedicated product area, or is it just a collaboration between the stakeholders from the business, heads of development and maybe CTO, or is there a dedicated CPO that's actually in there? And are they separate and have their own reporting line in up towards the CEO, or do they go in under either a business unit head or through the CTO? So I think it really does depend on the context, scale and maturity of the organization as to where it's up to. I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong. There's probably just the least worst for the context.
Cool. Thanks, Nick. Anyone else? Any specific questions on this? Or sorry, any specific thoughts or experiences? Again, to complement or contrast from what Nick's saying there. I think we're good. Okay, we are rapid fire getting through these questions. I'm just going to say, if anyone's got any specific questions that they want to bring up, talk about, or see discussed, feel free to stick it straight into the group chat here. We've only got 15 minutes left, so if there's anything else, I'm going to go through a few more that are on the board. But if you have got anything that you want to interrupt with and just see discussed, then put it here. But the next one that we had up were talking about tooling. Any tools, any specific tools to bridge this gap then, that anyone has come across that have worked?
Okay, so this is sort of where I wanted to chip in, and this is the reason for my person note about BDD, behavior-driven development. And I wanted to see if anyone had used any of these processes. So for people who don't know, behavior-driven development is an agile way of defining requirements, but refining them over time and keeping a sort of a mental model that is readable by all the stakeholders and that is sort of directly implementable by the engineers. And this model gets updated as prototypes comes out, releases come out, engineering limitations are discovered, product requirements change over time. And so as Anaplan, where we are, we use this quite a lot and we find it really, really useful. It's also software that requires like really strict requirements because it's calculation software. So yeah, I was wondering whether, because I'm writing a paper about this at the moment, so I wanted to see if there was any experience on such agile tools like BDD or generally requirements engineering processes that people are aware of.
I just wanted to comment on BDD. I think BDD is a great tool, and there was companies in the past where I've seen them implemented correctly as they actually using that language between product and engineering to talk about what we want to build and how to do it. But a lot of places I've seen it as an anti-pattern where engineering teams are using BDD because they want to add BDD to what they're doing, and they're using it in isolation and not really reaping the benefits. So it's either not part of the pipeline, or if it is part of the pipeline, it's not part of the user acceptance criteria in Jira tickets, or the product is they can't understand they can't understand the reason why they need to be using something like BDD. So I think it's a great tool, and I think it doesn't take too much learning curve for people to adopt it, because it is you just need to have a syntax, you just need to have the right people writing the right things, and then having a discussion about it, like having a chat about it, as I said it as well. But I just be aware of that anti-pattern where, yes, we BDD checked, and what does it mean? It means the development team is doing BDD and is not sharing with anyone. So yeah.
I think it's not a matter of tooling, but it's a matter of methodology and cultural thing and processes. Tooling is the last thing that you pick up. Been using a number of tools, and tool will not do the trick. It's all about methodology. That the most appropriate methodology in every case that you have to face. Whether that's Agile or Waterfall, which was years back, but I think tooling is the last thing, to be honest. It's about teaching cultural thing, methodology, and alignment, how people should work. That's what I believe. So, sorry, I don't have just a single tool to recommend. I'm sure there's so many out there.
if we wanted to go to the sort of tool level, I guess one thing is things like code climate velocity to sort of see where the engineering teams are against the industry benchmark. So sometimes that question is more from business is about, you know, how fast are we as an organization, or how quickly is it to the sort of cycle time for delivery. So that can be one way to kind of just further back up, hopefully, when you're kind of justifying how fast or how slow you're going, or as an organization where you are in that cycle. It's quite useful to justify. On the BDD side, using that for many years, originally even created a tool to kind of visualize some of those Gherkin type BDD stories out to the business stakeholders, so they could kind of easily understand and see why. If you get a really big code base, you get many of those documents and it's actually the why that's probably more important over time, I would say, as to the sort of the behaviors of the system, because you can with a platform that goes on 10+ years or something, if you've got a lot of these specs, it can be really interesting to maintain. But also I think with the behavior side, it allows you to refactor internally without having to, you know, get caught up with that from a change perspective. So I've seen it work well. I would always be using BDD, depending of course where you are on the cycle. If it's throwaway code, then maybe not at the early stages, but yeah, that's been my approach. I thought I'll say that, Joel, seeing as you kind of going down that road. But yeah, it's used it with much success over many years, for sure.
Does that help there, Joel?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So we use it in a like quite an integrated way, where it gives way to a formal specification of the calculation engine, where we can then generate the tests. So it is quite powerful. But what I'm focusing on at the moment is just like how do you interact with product about this, and like what we found is having this when you have to maintain such a set of requirements, you have to update them all the time. So you're sort of forced to talk with product on a weekly basis each time something changes or in any way. So it's a methodology, but it's also a tool that forces you to stay on track and have all stakeholders aligned.
Okay, cool, nice. Okay, one question that I'm keen to see any thoughts on from Chris. Why have a CPO at all? Anyone got any thoughts on that? Martin, Nick, I know you've been quite vocal on this one. Keen to get your thoughts on this.
I think it depends on the velocity and scale of what you're doing. If there is going to be more than one person in the product function, and the variety of products and what they're expected to work on, i.e. there's going to be a team, this team is likely to grow, then it's worth having a chief something or other who is going to run that team, irrespective of whether it's product, technology, whether it's going to be sales and marketing or what have you. So I'd say it's more a product, it's more a scale thing. That said, lots of people in smaller organizations attract a C-suite title that maybe they grow into over time. I don't know.
I would tend to agree. I think it's a scale thing. I think as you mature, you could be careful about where you split your time. If you have somebody wearing too many hats, you're not going to do a great job on all of those things. So having a CPO come in and take responsibility for that and really kind of form the whole vision and strategy for the organization makes sense. And really that product-led growth is a better way of as well getting out, understanding customer needs, and people start to specialize in different areas. So yeah, I also think, you know, at startup level, early stage, you also see the chief product officers as kind of a role that is in there from an early stage. I think it depends on the stage of growth. but definitely I see as a benefit of having the role. I think, like any roles that you tend to see getting in combination, you start to worry if somebody's trying to do too many of those things, especially at a later stage company.
Cool, thanks both. Chris, would you I don't know if you're listening there. I know the camera's not on, so I don't know if you're tuned in at the moment, but did you want to add or add any more context to that? I'm going to assume that's a no, or Chris is otherwise engaged. Okay, just time for one final point then. The card here was the product roadmap versus the delivery roadmap. Does anyone want to talk? Again, I don't have a name on that, so I'm not sure who put that one up, but does anyone have any thoughts or points to make around that? Nick, I can see you're unmuted there.
I was going to say, which one was that again? It was the product over delivery roadmap.
Yeah, product roadmap versus delivery roadmap is the card.
I suppose it depends who owns each, whether it's one person owning them. There's, I mean, it's a ground rife for conflicts, and depending on who's driving it. In some organisations, sales are notorious for driving it. In fact, they may even have dreamt up their own delivery roadmap that's mysteriously come out of the last person that they spoke with in front of the customer who promised them a purchase order that will never materialise. So, yeah, I think there's a part of having a product strategy is, and maybe an office of the CTO, is to provide that governance and to be a governor of what actually makes it through the gate so that it actually gets on the product roadmap. And it isn't necessarily always the person that shouts loudest. That's not to say that sales can't have an input. They are directly interfacing with the customer and their aspirations. But very few organizations are successful by saying yes to everything and then trying to deliver it all at once. So there's got to be priority in there, and a method of governance that sits around it. I don't know, is that controversial? I'm sure everyone loves sales.
You could see a fair few nods going on as you were talking there, Nick. So I wouldn't say it was too controversial, and certainly things that are often spoken about. But does anyone have any thoughts on that?
One thing we have found is the product needs to be good at working, and it depends on the organization again. There's go to delivery and there's go to market. We've used before, and normally quite often marketing are going to be involved in go to delivery, but that's not the full elements and support and fully formed product going forward. There needs to be a great product description, and but that's not enough to go to delivery, despite what some salespeople and senior management might think. There's a heck of a lot more that needs to go in place, particularly if you're running a full ITSM environment, and where many people are going to be relying on the quality of the information that you provide to them so that they can actually go and execute and support this product and this solution and its operation going forward. So yeah, it's one of the contentions that can come in place is detail, and who's going to provide that detail, and who's going to provide all the resources that come out of it so that the rest of the organization can actually go and execute, whether that's executing the delivery or whether it's executing the sale.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nick. I think that is going to be our parting note then. We're just in on time here. Guys, if you want to keep talking, feel free. There is obviously, we have the London CTOs Slack group. As I mentioned before, I'd highly recommend everyone connects. If anyone's been saying something you agree with, disagree with, want to talk more about, or anything like that, then connect. The networks within, I'm sure I don't need to tell you, but the amount of times that that we hear that people get their next CTO role through their network, like it's far and away the most effective way of finding roles. So always worth connecting with each other and just expanding your network off the back of that. especially if people are saying things where you're like, yes, I couldn't agree more. So thank you very much for being here, for joining in. If you're not in the Slack group, if you want to be added, then just ping me afterwards. And we'll be in touch anyway with some sort of questions around feedback and that sort of thing. So yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks for staying to the end, and we will see you at the next one. Cheers all.
All right.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
See ya.
Thank you.